So my name's Paul Greene. I'm an international sports lawyer. I've represented athletes from more than 70 countries and more than 70 different sports. A lot of the cases I've had over the years have been equestrian in the various disciplines. I've also done work with thoroughbred horses in the United States. But as it relates to the FEI, I've done cases with dressage, with jumping, with eventing, with endurance, various different disciplines. And um, I've been to the FEI headquarters in Lausanne many times. I've handled cases there, and I've also handled appeals to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, which is also based in Lausanne. So I have a deep understanding of the FEI process and the anti-doping rules, not just the anti-doping rules, the safe sport rules and the other types of rules that apply. One of my favorite cases I ever had was representing a horse named Sapphire, who ended up winning a gold medal and one of the great jumping horses, as I understand, of all time, who was American, in a case in 2008 in Geneva, involving actually a decision by a referee to disqualify Sapphire based on the fact that they said that she wasn't fit to continue based on her leg. And it was an interesting case, one that we ended up winning. But it showed me how much international sport is early on in my career is touched by politics, and you can never escape that. But I think it's a very interesting world in the sense of how broad it is in terms of scope. More than 200 countries now are subject to the FEI rules, and that's probably one of the more international sets of rules that exist in the world. The FEI anti-doping rules specifically are based on the World Anti-Doping Code, which is first begun in 2003. We're about to go through another version of the World Anti-Doping Code that's going to take effect in 2027. But the FEI is a signatory to the World Anti-Doping Code. And so anytime there's a change, they change their rules as well. The part about the FEI rules that you may not know is that there's two sets of them. It's the only sport actually that has that. There are rules that govern horses, and there are rules that govern human athletes, as they're called. So there's two sets of rules, and either one of them can end up getting somebody in trouble unknowingly. There's many different types of anti-doping rule violations beyond what we think of, which is thinking of a drug that somebody's taking intentionally ends up in a urine sample or a blood sample. That's the most common form of an anti-doping rule violation, which is called the presence of a banned substance. But there's also use or attempted use of a substance. And there's also refusing to submit to sample collection. So you could have a situation where you don't even intend to, but you're not ready for somebody to come and give a sample, or in competition, you don't really understand what's happening, and you let your horse urinate first in the stall before they give a sample after they've been notified, or you as the rider go and urinate before you give a sample. Well, that could be considered evasion under the way the rules are written. There's also something called whereabouts violations, which are involving information where certain athletes, and I want to know your familiarity with the rules, but certain athletes have to update where they are multiple times per day. A 1 hour window where they're able to be tested, where they're training, where they're staying overnight. And if that information is not properly updated in the database for the FEI, you could end up being banned for a minimum of 12 months as a result of whereabouts violations. And I've had multiple cases with equestrian riders, not that sophisticated, who got added to the pool of out of competition testing because they had a good year. And then all of a sudden they had to update their information, and they didn't, and ended up in trouble. There are intentional anti-doping rule violations as well: trafficking, possession of a banned substance with the intent to tamper or something like that. Also, prohibited associations. You have to be careful who you associate with. You can't just associate with anyone. You have to be sure you're not associating with a veterinarian or another trainer who's already banned. And you need to be aware of that kind of thing. Associating with somebody who's currently banned could be an issue. So all these things are ways that you can get potentially in trouble. Most of the time, I deal with people who get into unknowing situations. A lot of them are contamination led, meaning you have hay that gets contaminated. Sometimes you have somebody that works in a barn who will give a horse the wrong medicine. that could lead to a ban. Or somebody doesn't get a therapeutic use exemption to make sure that they're giving the right medicine to either themselves or to their horse. And there are controlled medications, and in addition to banned substances, that you could end up unknowingly giving to a horse and ending up getting in trouble. So that's kind of a brief overview in terms of what it means to commit an anti-doping rule violation. How do they have to prove this? Well, if they think that you committed one, they're going to send you a letter, and they might even provisionally suspend you that says you've been suspected of an anti-doping rule violation. We're provisionally suspending you from competition, and we're going to move forward with a hearing, in which case you have to immediately figure out what's going on and, have a lawyer to help you through that process and defend yourself against the charge. Sometimes it's straightforward and they can prove the charge. They have the burden to do so. If it's in the urine sample, it's probably going to be pretty straightforward. Some cases are more fact-based, like a whereabouts case where they have to prove you were unavailable 3 times in a row over a 12-month period. And so they have the burden to prove it, but assuming they do prove it, then you're dealing with a sanction. And each of the anti-doping rule violations I mentioned have potentially different sanctions. Some of them, though, could lead up to a 4-year ban from competition for both your horse and from you and for the responsible person or the human athlete, depending on the situation. So there can be real consequences for this kind of stuff. And in all these cases, the burden is often on the person to prove where the substance came from if it was, in fact, unintentional. And with contamination cases, you have to go ahead and figure out how the horse was contaminated or how you were contaminated. And sometimes that's not so easy. Another thing to think about is that they can go back up to 8 years in time and go back and retest samples or bring a case forward against somebody as much as 8 years after the event is alleged to have happened. So it's a long, long window under which somebody could be potentially liable for their conduct.